Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am honored to have as my guest today Dr. Elizabeth Laugeson. She is an associate clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at the UCLA Semel Institute and is a licensed clinical psychologist. Dr. Laugeson is the founder and director of the UCLA PEERS Clinic, which is an outpatient hospital-based program providing parent-assisted social skills training for individuals with autism spectrum disorder and other social impairments from preschool to adulthood. She is also the training director for the UCLA Tarjan Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. Having trained thousands of mental health professionals, educators, and families in the PEERS method, Dr. Laugeson is dedicated to developing and testing evidence-based treatments to improve social skills across the lifespan and disseminating these empirically supported programs across the globe. Welcome, Liz. I am so glad you could join me today to discuss bullying and how to effectively deal with it as a person with special needs.
Well, thank you, Gilda. Thank you for the invitation.
So, to begin, I'd like to ask you, why are children and adolescents with special needs at such a heightened risk for bullying?
You know, it's an excellent question, and no one can say for certain. Every child is different, but we do know that kids with special needs are twice as likely to be bullied by their peers as typically developing kids. And for certain kids with special needs, like those with autism spectrum disorder, they're 9 times more likely to be bullied than their peers. And there's many philosophies, many theories about why that might be. One is that a lot of kids with special needs are less socially competent, and so they don't really know what to do in situations where they're being teased or bullied, and they may in fact do exactly what the bully wants them to do. Mm-hmm. And so that would make it maybe more likely that they would be teased or bullied. Another theory is that they have fewer friends. Kids with special needs often struggle with friendships and making and keeping friends. And of course, if you think about who bullies like to pick on, they like to pick on the kids who are alone. And that's because they're an easier target. There's no one there to stick up for them or to defend them, to have their back. And so kids with special needs who are struggling with friendships are probably going to be more likely to be bullied. And then the final reason, common reason that people will cite for why kids with special needs are more likely to be bullied is a little bit more complicated, and that is that they get less peer support when they're being bullied. In other words, other kids aren't necessarily sticking up for them when they're being bullied. There's a lot of anti-bullying programs in schools these days, and sadly the research suggests that most of these programs aren't very effective, but the ones that include bystander support tend to be a little bit more effective, and that's where you get teach kids, typically developing kids, to stick up for the kids who are being bullied. But sadly for kids with special needs, that's not really happening so much. And one of the reasons that I would argue as to why that might be is that often kids with special needs, they may not be talking about their diagnoses or their difficulties, the challenges that they face, and so other kids may not know that they have these developmental issues or mental health issues. And I would argue that if other kids knew that they were struggling, whether it be social or not, that they might be more likely to stick up for them if they knew that they had some kind of challenges.
I agree with you. Excuse me. I agree with you, Liz. And it's unfortunate in that sense, but also I think a lot of schools keep that information purposely quiet because they don't want to invade the child's privacy. They want to respect, the family's wishes. Do they want them to know or not? And so it's a fine line to walk. But I agree with you that if the child is on board, if the family is on board, and they say yes, please let people know what my child's challenges are, so that they can be more aware and hopefully more sensitive to that. I agree. I think I would be all for that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I work a lot with kids, of course, with special needs, and in particular kids in the autism spectrum. And in some cases, the kids that I work with, they don't even know about their diagnosis. Or if they do, their parent may tell them, don't tell anybody about your diagnosis. And in fairness to the parents that are saying this to their kids or maybe not disclosing the diagnosis, the reason that they often give for doing this is that they don't want their child to feel different or to be treated differently. But in reality, very often these kids do feel different already, but maybe they don't know why if they haven't been told about their diagnosis. And in terms of people treating them differently, most of them will say that they're treated differently. And so I think that it's important that we step back, even with the good intentions that come with maybe not talking about a diagnosis or sharing it. It's important to step back and think about what the implications might be for not talking about a diagnosis. The first thing is, what kind of message does that send to a child if you say, don't tell anybody that you have this diagnosis? And most kids will say that it gives them a feeling of shame or embarrassment. And, I don't think that having any kind of special need is something to be ashamed of or to be embarrassed by. It just means that we're different. We're each different in our own ways. And the other thing is that if they, other kids that they're interacting with don't know that they have a particular diagnosis, then maybe some of the social difficulties, maybe some of the social errors that our kids might be making because of their diagnosis, may not be clear to their peers. It might look willful, in fact. So the best example I can think of is a kid on the autism spectrum. Kids on the autism spectrum make a lot of social mistakes or social errors. And, they'll do things like hog conversations and talk about the same thing over and over and sort of monologue or lecture to the other person. We call it conversation hogging. And it could be annoying to the other person, especially if they don't know they have autism. Another common social error that they might make is something I call policing. And it's where they notice when people are breaking rules. And they tend to be very rule-driven. They follow rules a lot, but they notice when people break rules. And so they feel very compelled to point out rule violations. And they're kind of telling everybody what they're doing wrong all the time. And I call it policing. Well, people don't like that, especially their peers. And so I think that if teenagers, children, if they understood that their peer was doing this because they have autism, not because they're being willfully annoying, they might be less likely to tease or bully them. Or if someone else were teasing or bullying them, they might be more likely to stick up for that kid if he or she was being bullied, if they knew that they had autism or some other type of special need. So my first, thing in speaking with parents about the bullying dynamic is talking about, basically being honest with others about the challenges that we face. That might be the first step in others accepting us or tolerating differences, rather than making these differences look like they're willful in some way.
I agree with you 100%, Liz, because as a matter of fact, many of the young adults, children and young adults, people who are on the spectrum that I have spoken to directly have actually told me that they prefer transparency. They don't want it to be a secret. They want their parents to be real with them. They want them to listen to them and to do more of what works and less of what doesn't work. I've heard this time and time again directly from the young people themselves. So I could not agree with you more on that. So tell me, what is PEERS, and how is this program different from other programs that teach strategies for handling bullying?
Right. Well, PEERS is an acronym. It stands for the Program for the Education and Enrichment of Relational Skills, and it's essentially a social skills training intervention. It was originally developed for teens on the autism spectrum and then young adults on the autism spectrum, but it's actually used clinically with people that don't have autism, so other people with special needs or social challenges. We often work with kids or adults with ADHD or depression, anxiety, any number of mental health issues, but also just kids that don't have diagnoses. They're just sort of struggling socially. We teach social skills in a very unique way, though, and it makes it sort of different from other programs in the community, one thing is that this is an evidence-based social skills intervention. That means that there's a lot of research that shows that the program is effective in helping people make and keep friends and also handle conflict and rejection. That's a very unique aspect of the program. Most social skills interventions out there are not evidence-based, have never been researched or studied to find if they're actually effective. Another aspect of peers that makes it unique from other programs is that it's parent or caregiver assisted. And what that means is that we have parents or other caregivers that go through the program concurrently or simultaneously with the teens or the young adults that we're working with. And this is so that they can act as social coaches to kids outside of the group. These are time-limited programs. They're 16 weeks in length. They come once a week for 90 minutes. This is not a lot of time in the grand scheme of life. So if we're relying just on ourselves as maybe mental health professionals or educators to teach these skills, we're not going to have a lot of time with these individuals. But parents and caregivers, they tend to be there the vast majority of the time. And so we want to train them to be good social coaches to these individuals when the program is no longer happening or meeting, maybe even just outside of the program during the week. And then finally, another reason that this program is different from other social skills interventions is that we're teaching ecologically valid social skills. So what that means is that we're not just teaching what adults think that kids should do in social situations. We're teaching what we know actually works in reality, what socially successful people are naturally doing. That's what's ecologically valid. And we rely on research to tell us what's ecologically valid, because very often social skills, they come so naturally to all of us that we don't think about what we're doing in social situations. So it's very easy to give bad advice in social situations. Even if you're socially savvy, it's easy to do that because what we're doing is so automatic. And so we're relying on that research also to tell us what are the socially successful rules and steps that people follow in handling bullying or in making friends.
Well, and based on what you've just said, talk a little bit about the different types of bullying experienced by children and adolescents with special needs, and how do you teach them to handle these challenging situations?
Well, that's a great question because I think a lot of people use that term bullying pretty loosely to describe a number of pretty distinct behaviors. And the research would suggest that there's probably about 4 different types of bullying. And the most common type of bullying pretty much across the globe is verbal bullying, which we more often refer to as teasing. So that's making fun of people with words. Another type of bullying is physical bullying. Now, physical bullying, automatically you think of hitting and kicking and pushing, kind of that aggressive behavior. But it could also include things like throwing something at someone, tripping someone in the hallway, putting a note on someone's back, stealing from them. These are all physical forms of bullying. Another type of bullying is technically referred to as electronic bullying, but we more commonly refer to that as cyberbullying. And that can involve teasing and name-calling and making fun of someone, but it's done electronically, and so the behavior looks slightly different. And then finally, the 4th type of bullying is what's called relational bullying. So relational bullying is things like social exclusion. We're not friends with you anymore. Or more commonly, things like rumors and gossip. And this is often the kind of that mean girl kind of bullying that we often see that's very common, sadly, in adolescence. So because there's really 4 very distinct types of bullying, the first strategy in simply handling bullying and knowing how to respond to it is to typically just define it. What type of bullying are we looking at? And then choose a strategy based on that definition. And because those are 4 very distinct types of bullying, the strategies that we teach teens and adolescents as well as adults are completely different based on the type of bullying.
Okay. Did you want to mention 1 or 2 of those strategies just to kind of give an example of what those would look like?
Sure, I will. I'd be happy to. The most common form of bullying, as I mentioned, is verbal bullying or teasing. And before I even tell you what the ecologically valid strategy is for handling teasing, I want to ask you a simple question. And I ask this question to every group of kids and adults that I work with. I always ask, what do adults tell you to do in response to teasing? Because this is one of those areas where adults give really bad advice, unfortunately. Not intentionally, but pretty much across the globe, kids that are struggling with teasing, they're told to do 3 different things. And it doesn't matter where you are. Their kids on the planet will tell you the same 3 things, and then they'll tell you that they don't work. So what do you think, Gilda? What do you think adults will typically tell kids to do in response to teasing?
Well, I know what my mom used to tell me.
What's that?
And I've seen it happen with other kids, as well, and it never works. And that's ignore them. Just ignore them.
Yeah, they're always told to ignore them, right?
Right.
And I ask kids if it works, and what do you think they say?
No.
Doesn't work. The reason it doesn't work is this. I mean, imagine that you were teasing me, and I'm sure you would never do that. But Gilda, imagine you were teasing me, and I ignored you. What would you do?
Well, I would just probably go after you more, which is usually what the bully does.
Exactly.
Because they want a response.
They do. They want a response. And by me not responding, by me ignoring you, it actually shows that I'm kind of weak because I didn't do anything, and you're more likely to tease me. So it's not a good strategy. But a lot of adults will say to ignore because they do know that the teaser is looking for a reaction. They want to get you upset or mad. And so they're right about that. You don't want to get mad or upset. This is true. But ignoring it alone is also not going to be effective because the person's just going to keep teasing you. Now, another thing that kids are often told to do is they're told to walk away. You probably heard that one before, too.
Oh, yeah.
So walk away doesn't work either. I ask every kid that tells me that it doesn't work. They say no. Well, the reason is, again, imagine that you're teasing me and I walk away. What would most people do? Well, they would probably follow me. Yeah. Keep teasing me. And once again, just like the previous example, I look weak because I didn't do anything. And I'm going to be more likely to be teased. It's really easy to tease me. And then the final strategy that adults tell kids to do, this is really common to you. Want to guess what it is that they tell kids to do?
Oh, let's see.
It has something to do with other adults.
Go tell an adult.
That's right. They're told to go tell an adult.
Right.
So then I ask kids if that works, and what do you guess that they say?
No, because then they get a reputation as a tattletale.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. They get a reputation as being a tattletale or a snitch. And, at the very least, that person wants to retaliate against them because they try to get them in trouble. And, the kid's probably not going to get in trouble. It's just your word against theirs. So these are horrible strategies. And yet across the globe, kids are told to do these 3 things. They're told to ignore, walk away, or tell an adult. And they just don't tend to work very often. So instead, we've done research on what do socially successful kids do when they're being teased. And it's not ignore or walk away or tell an adult. It's not tease back either. Sometimes people will be told to do that. Instead, what they do is pretty simple. They'll give a very short comeback that shows that what the person said didn't really bother them. And in fact, what they said was kind of stupid. It was kind of lame. And so they'll say things like, whatever, or and your point is, or am I supposed to care? Is that supposed to be funny? So what? Big deal. Who cares? There's all these very short comebacks that reflect, this sense of not really caring and sort of saying what the person said was kind of stupid. And that makes the teasing not fun for the person who's teasing you. And in fact, it might even embarrass them a little bit because you're kind of acting like what they said was sort of lame. And that's what you want. You want it to not be reinforcing for that person. You don't want them to feel rewarded in some way for teasing. You want it to be a little bit embarrassing or, not be fun for them. And that's what socially successful kids naturally do. And the reality is that every kid gets teased. It doesn't matter how popular you are. Every kid gets teased, but it's how you react to it that determines how significantly or severely, how chronically you're teased. And, of all the skills that we teach in peers, this is probably the easiest strategy that we teach because it's not
it also
difficult.
shows confidence when you just say, am I supposed to care? Whatever,
It absolutely
it gives
does.
that air, which, again, like you said, the bully's like, well, this isn't fun.
Yeah, exactly. And they'll probably want to move on. One of the questions I'll often ask kids when they learn this strategy is, what did it feel like in using those comebacks? And the most common word that they will use is that it's empowering. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's so true. It is very empowering. It's very confident to be able to know what to say in those situations and to know that you're going to diffuse it. You're sort of taking the control back in that bullying dynamic. And it's a very simple technique to learn. There's a couple things I should mention, too, that we have to clarify, though, for our kids is that, they always need to be ready with at least a couple or a few comebacks. Just saying whatever one time doesn't mean they're going to automatically stop.
Right.
The other thing that we have to tell them is that the comeback needs to make sense. So in other words, if, someone were to be teasing me and I would say, like they said, Liz, you're so stupid. And I said, and your point is? That doesn't make sense. I'm actually agreeing with them. So we don't want to use that one in that situation. Right. I think I love the comeback whatever, because whatever pretty much works in every situation. But you have to be ready with a couple or a few comebacks. And then after you've given those comebacks, you don't have to stand there and take it. Then you can walk away. Then you can disengage. If you can't walk away, maybe you turn away. But the reality is you don't have to stand there and keep waiting for them to give you more. But you never walk away until you've first given some sort of short comeback that shows that what the person said didn't bother you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that makes great sense. I absolutely love that strategy. So what about the next form of bullying? What if it escalates to the level of physical bullying? How would they handle that?
Yeah, good question. So, sometimes physical bullies who bully and get aggressive, they sometimes will also tease. And so that's why I said it's very important to first define what kind of bullying we're talking about. And if we're talking about teasing, but it's coming from someone who has a tendency to get aggressive, we shouldn't use those teasing comebacks. And the reason is that they embarrass the other person. And what do you imagine that a physical bully would do if they got embarrassed?
Well, the first thing they would probably do is lash out physically.
Exactly. So there's certain people that we tell our kids not to use these comebacks with, and physical bullies are one group. The other group, incidentally, would be adults. Think about that. What could be the problem with saying whatever to your mom or your teacher? You can get in a lot of trouble.
Right. That might not work so well.
Yeah. So this is just for other peers and also people that don't tend to get aggressive. So we have to give our kids different strategies for handling those physical bullies. Now, before I tell you what we teach our kids to do, what do you imagine that most adults would tell kids to do if they're being physically bullied?
Oh, fight back?
Sometimes fight back. Now, fight back usually comes from a parent. I don't think your teacher is going to tell you to fight back.
No.
I don't think that your therapist is going to tell you to do that. But probably your parent, often dads, will sometimes say fight back. And the reality about fight back, to be perfectly honest, we're teaching ecologically valid social skills in peers. And so that means we're not teaching what we think that kids should do. We're teaching what actually works in reality. And truthfully, fighting back works sometimes because the bully doesn't want to pick on the kid who's going to fight back. They want to pick on the kid who doesn't fight back. But having said that, I, as a licensed clinical psychologist, cannot tell kids to fight back.
I would imagine you would say something like, go tell an adult.
Yeah, that's the more common thing. So, but just, in terms of this whole fighting back, I can't tell a kid to fight back. What you can tell your own child to do is different than what a teacher or a mental health professional can tell a kid to do. So, but I also never lie to a child and say that doesn't work. I just, point out that I can't really tell them to do that. And I also point out there could be a lot of problems with fighting back. What could happen? You could get hurt. That person could get hurt. You could get in trouble. You could get expelled or suspended from school. You could get a bad reputation. There are problems with fighting back, but I'm never going to tell a kid it doesn't work because in reality it does sometimes work. Now, the other thing that you mentioned that adults will tell kids to do is to go tell an adult. Right? If you're going to get, if you're getting physically bullied, go tell an adult. Now, that's not a horrible strategy in every situation, but remember, physical bullying could also be things like tripping someone in the hallway or, shoving someone, into their locker as you're walking by. And imagine that a kid goes and tells an adult, when this happens, what do you think is going to happen to the kid who's bullying them?
The retaliation will probably increase.
Yeah, they'll definitely want to retaliate. And also, once again, it's sort of my word against that other person if I go tell an adult. And, unless there was a video or somebody that was a witness, nothing will probably happen to that kid, especially for some minor offense, technically minor, like tripping someone or something. They could say it was an accident. And so telling an adult isn't always the best first strategy to use. There are other things that kids can do. And so once again, looking at the research of what do socially successful kids do who've been successful at escaping physical bullying, well, they'll do these very simple things, like they'll essentially avoid the bully. The bully can't find you. He can't bully you. So you might plan your route in school. A lot of times kids will know where the bully hangs out in school or where their locker is. Maybe they'll know even the class schedule of the bully. And they'll often plan their route throughout school to kind of avoid that person. You can't always, avoid the bully, but that's a good strategy if you can use it. Another strategy is that you want to lay low when the bully is around. And what that means is don't draw attention to yourself. Don't kind of keep a low profile, sort of fly under the radar when the bully is around. And the idea behind that is if the bully doesn't notice you, he's not going to bully you. But unfortunately for a lot of kids with special needs, they'll do things that will draw attention to themselves when the bully is around. And in fact, sometimes they try to, buddy up with the bully and try to make friends with them, maybe try to, tell jokes and be funny. And that often just draws attention to them. This is also related to another strategy, and that is don't try to make friends with the bully. So think about it. Why do you think that the kids with special needs will try to make friends with the kids who are trying to bully them?
Well, probably because they are looking at it from a personal perspective. And from their perspective, they don't see any reason why this person shouldn't like them, and very innocently think, well, maybe if we were friends, this bullying behavior, this behavior that I don't like, wouldn't happen.
Yeah, that's what most kids will say, is that they want the bully to stop bullying them, and that's why they try to make friends. But do you think that that's a very effective strategy?
No, absolutely not.
No, if anything, it just draws more attention to them, and it gives the bully more opportunities to bully them. And most of the time it doesn't work, but imagine even if they were to develop a friendship with this bully, a lot of times bullies aren't the best friends. They kind of bully their friends too. So it's not really a good strategy to minimize or stop the bullying. Another important thing too is that, think about who bullies want to pick on. Do they want to pick on the kid who's alone or the kid who's in a group?
Oh, of course, the loner. That's usually who ends up getting picked on. Right.
And why do you think they pick on that loner?
Because the loner is easier to pick on, just like out in the wild. When the hunters go hunting, they pick on that one animal that straggles behind the rest of the herd, and that's usually the one that gets taken down.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a lot safer to kind of be in a group. And so another strategy that we tell kids is to stay with their friends, essentially, hang out with other people. That means that you shouldn't be walking to class alone. You shouldn't be eating lunch alone. You shouldn't be sitting alone on the school bus. So they should be hanging out with other kids, because bullies want to pick on the kid who's alone. They're the easy target. They don't want to pick on the kid who's got other people that might defend them or stick up for them.
Yeah, but then again, we encounter the problem where a lot of special needs young people with special needs, I should say, who are on the spectrum, have problems making friends and keeping those friendships and so on.
This is a common comment that parents will make. And what I'll say there is that, none of these strategies work 100% of the time. If they did, we'd have one strategy.
Right.
We got multiple strategies. So if they have someone to walk to class with, or they have a friend to eat lunch with, then that's going to protect them. But not all of our kids have that. So we do have to work on friendships as well. But just like, you can't always avoid the bully. There's no one strategy that's going to work 100% of the time. So we have to give them multiple strategies.
Right.
Now, in addition to those, very good, strong strategies, you also think about where kids hang out. And I always think about lunchtime. It seems like a lot of bullying happens during lunchtime. A lot of kids they have their free time. And where do you think that most kids who are being bullied will go at lunchtime to avoid being bullied?
Oh, gosh, where will they go? I guess the corner of the yard that other people don't hang out in, or maybe the library, or maybe back
Yeah.
into the classroom.
Exactly. Most of the kids that we will talk to will say that they'll go to a favorite teacher's classroom or they'll go to the library. And when we ask them why they do that, it's because they feel safe there. They know that they're protected. And I don't want our kids to not be socially engaged, although I do understand that they are protected when they're near adults. So instead of going to the library or instead of going to their favorite teacher's classroom, what we suggest is that you can stay near an adult when the bully is around. That doesn't mean you need to go strike up a conversation with the lunch monitor, right? You just need to maybe sit near the lunch monitor. A lot of bullying also happens, for example, on school buses. Where do you think most of the bullying happens on that school bus?
Oh, at the back of the bus.
In the back of the bus, exactly. So where could a kid sit if he or she didn't want to be bullied on the bus?
Near the driver.
That's right. That doesn't mean they have to strike up a conversation with that driver, but they can stay near the driver. And, the bully's not going to bully them right in front of that adult. They know they could get in trouble. So these are some of the strategies that we teach our kids for handling physical bullying. There are others. And then, of course, there's always the option that if, they feel like they're in physical danger or these other strategies aren't working, they can certainly get help from an adult. But that's not always the best first strategy.
So now what about the next form of bullying where the bully isn't actually physically present but is on the internet and doing it over social media and other websites and so forth?
Yeah. So cyberbullying is what you're referring to, or electronic bullying. And this is the most recent phenomena of all the different types of bullying. And it's been interesting as a social skills researcher to watch the evolution of this new phenomena, cyberbullying. And I remember about 15 years ago when cyberbullying was becoming more common, the frustrating thing for a lot of kids who were being cyberbullied was that they often didn't know who was cyberbullying them, that it was sort of anonymous. Well, that has completely changed over the years, and very often kids actually do know who's cyberbullying them. And so there's some very specific strategies that we can use if we know who the perpetrator is and also if we don't know who they are. What I should say about this particular strategy or this set of strategies is that cyberbullying is constantly changing. And so the strategies that we have today will most likely be different, months or even, years from now, because kids are always finding new ways to bully each other online. So keep that in mind, that these are strategies that work at this point in time, but we'll have to constantly be evolving with new strategies since the act of cyberbullying will be different in the future. At present, though, one of the things that kids do to cyberbully each other is that they use social media. You just mentioned that. And what are some of the things that you know of that kids do on social media to bully each other?
Oh, it kind of speaks to the next form we're going to talk about, which is the gossip and the rumor mill and so forth. They say things that aren't true to try and create rumors about the person, or they call them names, or they basically lie. They say things that aren't true, or they demean them, those sort of things.
Yeah. So remember how I was saying that the first thing we have to do in handling any kind of bullying is to first identify it, to label what type of bullying it is. And this is really important, particularly when it comes to cyberbullying, because cyberbullying can come in the form of things like teasing, where someone's making fun of you, calling you names, and on the surface, that looks like teasing. And so maybe you might want to use the strategy of using a short comeback. But here's the problem. Those comebacks don't work when it's electronic bullying or cyberbullying, because they're just words on a screen. If someone were to write whatever, or your point is, it doesn't have the same effect as when it's in person. So defining the type of bullying is going to be really critical, because the strategies for handling verbal bullying don't work when you're talking about something that's happening electronically. So we have a whole different set of strategies in this case. Now, the first strategy that we often teach is a saying that we actually borrowed from the internet. And the saying is, don't feed the trolls. Have you heard that expression before? Don't
I sure
feed
have.
the trolls. Yeah. So if people haven't heard that expression before, there's a group of people online, and they're called trolls. And they're essentially cyberbullies. They're trolling the internet, trying to pick fights with people. They're very unpleasant people, but they're essentially cyberbullies. And so the saying, don't feed the trolls, really just means don't react. That when you react, you even say anything to that cyberbully or that troll, you're actually feeding them, and you're making them stronger. And it's making
so in this case,
likely.
Ignoring actually might work.
In this case, ignoring is going to be more effective than reacting in any way. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's important to define the bullying first. Now, don't feed the trolls is one strategy. We have others. Another is something that we discovered in our own monitoring of cyberbullying websites. Now, this is a relatively new phenomenon. As I mentioned, there hasn't been a ton of research on cyberbullying. Most of the research that's out there really is defining the act of cyberbullying, talking about how people cyberbully, and less about what works in terms of handling it and minimizing cyberbullying. So this one we discovered by simply monitoring cyberbullying websites. And there literally are websites out there that are devoted to cyberbullying. And many of them are devoted to doing what you described, which is spreading vicious rumors and gossip online. And so one of the things we discovered was very quickly reacting wasn't working. So that's the don't feed the trolls rule. The other thing, though, that we recognized that was working was when someone else stuck up for the kid who was being cyberbullied. So, the kid who's being cyberbullied can't stick up for him or herself because that's just feeding the trolls. But having someone else stick up for them seemed to be effective. And the way I understand that is I think that cyberbullies are a lot like real-life bullies. They always want to pick on that kid who's alone, who's unprotected. They don't want to have a fight with a group of people, so they'll often back down. But who defends this person is very important. So this could be a friend, it could be a peer around the same age, it could even be a sibling or a family member around the same age. But this would not include parents and other adults. Think about that. What could be the problem with mom or dad getting online and saying, leave my son alone?
That would just be feeding the trolls, and that would probably prompt them to do more and do even more vicious things like, oh, look, there's mommy trying to protect you, yada, yada, yada.
Right. They're probably going to get teased about that. So, very well-intentioned parents will often do that. And, it just doesn't tend to help the kids that much. There are other things that parents can do to help support their kids, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But getting online and, sticking up for your kid on social media or over electronic communication might not be the best strategy for them. There's other things we can do. But having someone around their age stick up for them, that's effective. Now, the other thing that happens, too, I remember I said when cyberbullying first started to become this big epidemic, it was often very anonymous. But that's changed dramatically. And now very often kids know who's cyberbullying them. So another form of cyberbullying that often occurs is through harassing text messages. Now, if I was receiving harassing text messages from someone and I didn't want to receive those messages anymore, what could I do to prevent
block the person?
That's right. You can block that cyberbully. So very often you can block that phone number if it's a text. If they're a person in your social media and your network, you can unfriend them. You can block them. It's not going to work 100% of the time. Kids can find each other in other ways. None of these strategies work 100% of the time. Again, if they did, we'd just have one strategy. We're going to probably have to use multiple strategies. But blocking that bully is also another strategy. Now, another thing that will happen is imagine that I'm being cyberbullied on Instagram. Should I continue to post things on Instagram while I'm being cyberbullied?
Probably not. Probably not a good idea.
Not a good idea. So I need to lay low online. That means I shouldn't be posting a lot while I'm being cyberbullied. Let's let things kind of just lay low for a while, let things die down, and then we can kind of reemerge. Some parents will even suspend their kids' accounts for a little while. I'm not saying they have to do that, but laying low online is also another strategy. Now, imagine that I'm trying all these things. It's not really working. I'm still being cyberbullied. I might even have to report this to someone. Now, where do you think most kids will report the cyberbullying if this is with, let's say, a classmate at school?
The teacher?
Yeah, a teacher, the
Yeah.
principal, school administration, they'll often go to school and they'll report the cyberbullying. Now, what do you think is the first thing that the school administration is going to ask to see?
Evidence,
Yeah.
right?
They want to see evidence. So that's another strategy, is that we need to save the evidence. But that doesn't mean that we want to leave this evidence up on our social media where anyone could see it. So imagine I was being cyberbullied on Instagram. How could I simultaneously save that evidence but also delete it so that nobody could see it?
I guess take a screenshot of it.
That's right.
And then delete it?
That's exactly right. So we tell them to take a screenshot and then delete that and hold on to that evidence in case they need to report it. A couple new strategies that we've just discovered recently have to do with privacy settings. Now, of course, we always teach our kids that if they're going to be on social media, they need to be using privacy settings just to be safe and secure. But those privacy settings can also help with cyberbullying. So a lot of kids will cyberbully each other through tags and comments. So the comments are pretty basic. I think everyone understands that when you post something on social media, people can comment on what you post very often. And that's often where kids will cyberbully each other. So if we don't want to be cyberbullied over the comments in our social media, we can approve or block the comments. And what that means is in your privacy settings, you can make it so that no one can just comment on your post without you approving them first. Some people will even block comments altogether. Now, I'm not a fan of that because the fun of social media is that it's interactive, but it is an option. And the same is true for tags. So tags, for anyone who's not familiar with that, are where let's say I post a picture of you and me, and then I tag you, Gilda, in this post. And that means that all of the people in my network not only see the picture, but everyone in your network also sees this picture. Well, a lot of kids are cyberbullying each other by tagging them, maybe in embarrassing photos or posts. So if I didn't want to be cyberbullied through the tags, I could approve or block the tags. Yeah. And then, the final strategy, these are a number of things. We hope that these things work, but if these aren't working, we definitely recommend that our kids get help from a supportive adult, and that would include parents or teachers, other school personnel. And in some cases, our kids have to report this. So if they're being cyberbullied on Facebook, perhaps they could report this to Facebook. If they're being cyberbullied on their phone, maybe their service provider. But the most common would be the school. And in really extreme cases, law enforcement. Most of your listeners should know, if they don't already, that in many parts, at least of the U.S., cyberbullying is considered illegal behavior and is actually punishable as a crime. I'm kind of curious, though, if you have any ideas about why you think that it is that law enforcement takes cyberbullying, of all four types of bullying, why do you think they take this so seriously? Because my impression is they take cyberbullying more seriously than any type of bullying.
Well, I would just hazard a guess to say perhaps because there are other much more serious crimes that these people who cyberbully have a tendency to commit if they do get a response or if they do draw their victim into their web, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, there definitely is that they also, many kids with special needs can be very easy victims for perpetrators online, whether it's cyberbullying or not. So that is true. And, another reason that a lot of people might say that law enforcement takes cyberbullying so seriously is because we've seen in the media a lot lately this link between cyberbullying and suicide attempts and even completed suicides. I think that everyone is aware of that there's this link very often. And so I do think that law enforcement takes it seriously for that reason. But I would also argue that there's another reason that we sometimes don't think about, and that is that when it comes to cyberbullying, there's always evidence. It's the only form of bullying where there will always be evidence. There's always some kind of a trail, and they have to do something because there's always going to be evidence. It's not your word against theirs. There's always going to be evidence. And again, I think we all know the serious nature of cyberbullying and the serious consequences that can come from that. But I would argue that the evidence is really what kind of forces law enforcement to take it as seriously as they do.
Very true. Very, very good point. Very good point. So how can teens then minimize this gossip, whether it's gossip that's being spread in person at school? We've just talked about how to minimize the gossip on social media or on the internet, but what about if they're the target of rumors at school or in other areas?
Yeah. So of all the different types of bullying and the research that I've read on all these different types, this is the most interesting to me because, relational bullying or rumors and gossip, it's interesting, but when it comes to how to react to this, I've discovered that every instinct we have is essentially wrong when it comes to rumors and gossip. That's what's so fascinating. Every instinct we have is wrong. So imagine that someone is spreading a rumor about me. People are talking about me behind my back. There's this horrible gossip about me. What do you think my instinct will be? What will I want to do?
Well, the first instinct would be to vehemently deny it.
Absolutely. That's the instinct, but every instinct I have is wrong. So imagine what that would look like. Imagine I were to go around school or the workplace, wherever I happen to be, telling everybody that this rumor isn't true and don't believe it. It's not true. It never happened. Well, how do I look to other people if I'm telling them, oh, it's not true, don't believe it? What does that look like?
Well, that's like the old Shakespearean line, "Thou doth protest too much."
Yeah, exactly.
It makes you look guilty, frankly.
It makes you look guilty. You're absolutely right, Gilda. Yeah. That is what it looks like. You look guilty. And by the virtue of looking, guilty, because you look defensive, you should understand. That's why it makes you look guilty. You look defensive when you're denying and trying to disprove. For adults who can't really relate to this, I always use celebrity gossip as an example. So, have you ever heard of those celebrities that sue tabloids over gossip that's been printed about them?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, they could win the court case, but it's kind of interesting. There'll always be someone who still believes the original gossip. And in fact, they're adding fuel to the rumor mill. Have you ever heard of a celebrity that sued some tabloid over some rumor you never heard about in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It's adding fuel to the rumor mill. So there's nothing you can do to completely disprove a rumor. You could have a mountain of evidence, and you're never going to completely convince everyone it's not true. And you look guilty when you're trying to deny and disprove. So you're not going to want to do that. And I'm not going to say ignore it altogether because we're going to be more proactive than that. But we're not quite there yet. Let's talk more about these, every instinct is wrong situations. So imagine how it feels. Imagine that I'm the target of rumors and gossip. How do I feel?
Well, you don't feel very good.
No, I probably feel upset. I'm probably pretty sad, pretty upset, pretty mortified. But I can't show people that I'm upset.
Right.
Because as soon as I show that I'm upset, what do I look like?
Again, you look guilty.
You look guilty. It's so unfair.
Yeah.
Of course I'm upset if there's a rumor about me, but you look guilty in the process, so you can't show that you're upset. Every instinct we have is wrong. And you have to be very careful who you talk to when you are the target of a rumor. Even talking to your best friend is a little bit risky for some kids because the best friend might inadvertently spread the gossip. They might go to another friend and say, oh, I feel so sorry for Liz. She's really upset about this gossip. And inadvertently, they're spreading the rumor. They're adding fuel to the rumor mill because now people are talking about how upset I am. So you have to be very careful who you talk to. I think family members, obviously parents and therapists, teachers, that's okay, but be very cautious about showing people that you're upset because you're going to look guilty, sadly. Now, also imagine that there's a rumor about me and I know who's spreading the rumor. What do I want to do?
You want to confront that person.
I want to confront that person.
The first instinct.
Exactly, but every instinct I have is what?
Wrong.
It's wrong. Every instinct I have is wrong. So imagine I go up to this person and I confront them. And I say, I know you're spreading this rumor about me. You seriously need to stop. That's not true. That never happened. Seriously, that's not cool. What do you think that person's going to say to me? Are they going to say, oh, yeah, Liz, you're right. I shouldn't have spread that rumor. You know what? Don't worry. I'll go tell everybody it's not true. Don't worry. I got your back. I'll take care of this. Is that ever going to happen?
No. In fact, they're going to say, "Oh, must have hit on something because I'm pushing your buttons."
Exactly. I probably made it worse for myself, not better. In each of these situations, I'm making it worse for myself, not better. And now this person probably wants to retaliate against me even further. You know, they might feel justified. And at the very least, that is amazing gossip. I just confronted this person who is not going to be talking about that. I just added fuel to the rumor mill. So once again, every instinct we have is wrong. It's a fascinating thing about rumors and gossip. So that's a lot of what we should not be doing. Now let's talk about what we should be doing. Okay. So one of the things that happens when you're the target of gossip is that everybody's talking behind your back. But the other thing that happens is that people will sometimes come up to you and they'll ask you about the gossip. And
is that really true?
Yeah, right? They're going to ask. And your instinct, of course, is to be denying and trying to disprove it. But remember, every instinct we have is wrong. So instead, this is what you do. You simply act amazed anyone would believe or care about that rumor. So it doesn't even matter if it's true. If it's true, you can't believe anyone cares about it. And so you're saying things like, seriously, people are talking about that? People need to get a life. Like, find something interesting to talk about. Get a hobby, something like that. If it is true, or it rather isn't true, then you can't believe anyone believes it. You're saying things like, really, people believe that? People are so gullible. People will believe anything. But you're acting amazed that anyone believes or cares about it. You can do both of those things. And you're making it not fun to talk about that rumor or that gossip. And that makes it seem like the rumor is kind of stupid. And it makes the person that you're saying that to less inclined to spread that gossip. Now, that's very effective for the people that come up and talk to you about it. But there's one last strategy that I teach our kids to do in peers that's really, really effective in pretty much killing this gossip. And that is, we teach them to spread the rumor about themselves. Now, I know that sounds crazy, right? Like, who would ever want to do that? I want it to sound crazy because I want them to remember to do this. It's so clever. So there's very specific steps that you follow in spreading the rumor about yourself. The first step is that you have to find an audience, right? People need to hear this. So where do you think that there might be an audience at school?
Well, during recess, during lunchtime, I would say that's probably the time that the largest audience would be available.
Yeah, I think lunchtime is perfect. It could be recess for younger kids if they have recess, maybe before class starts or when people are just kind of standing around talking, maybe on the school bus. But lunchtime is a great time. So first thing is, you have to find an audience. Second step is that you need to find a supportive friend. All right, now this doesn't have to be your best friend, just someone that you think would sort of support you and kind of agree with you. And you wouldn't be telling this person that you were going to do this. So find that audience, find that supportive friend. Third step is you're going to acknowledge the rumor. So you're going to say something like, hey, did you hear this rumor that I have a crush on so-and-so? And it's not a long description of the rumor. You're not getting into the juicy details of the rumor. You're just acknowledging that this rumor is out there. So your friend, it doesn't even matter if they've heard of it or not. They might say, yeah, I heard that rumor, or maybe they didn't. Doesn't matter. The fourth step is where you're going to act amazed anyone believes or cares about that rumor. So you're going to say, hey, did you hear this rumor that I have a crush on so-and-so? And their friend might say, yeah, I did hear that rumor. And you might say something like, seriously, people are talking about that? People need to get a life. Like, find something interesting to talk about. And it's your supportive friend, so they're probably going to agree with you and say, yeah, that really is kind of stupid, isn't it? And then you might say, yeah, like, and who would believe that anyway? And that's about the extent of the conversation. And then the fifth step is you repeat with other supportive friends. So you're not going to just do this once. You're going to do this several times in front of an audience. And that is about as close as you're going to get to killing the rumor. Now, again, if adults who are listening to this podcast are having trouble picturing what this looks like, celebrities do this all the time. Right, so celebrities get gossiped about all the time, but this is the celebrity that's going to go up on the red carpet, go straight to the reporter, and they won't even wait for the reporter to ask them the question, right? They'll just start making fun of the rumor. And then it's like the new rumor is how stupid the old rumor was. It's like the first story on, Access Hollywood or whatever is how stupid this
like
rumor
the anti-rumor.
Yeah, and it makes fun of this rumor, and you don't look defensive in the process. And that's about as close as you're going to get to killing that rumor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
that makes perfect sense, actually. And you're right. Last time that I saw any of a show of that ilk, or a celebrity on a talk show or whatever, dealing with that sort of a thing, with a rumor or whatever, that is exactly the strategy that they use. And it works.
Yeah, it really does. Yeah. It's interesting. Somebody in their PR, firm must have, read that research. And I don't think this stuff is intuitive. I really don't. I think that every instinct that we have is actually wrong. But again, if we know the strategies for handling all these different types of bullying, we can really minimize the impact of bullying for kids and adults.
So tell me, does someone actually have to go to UCLA to learn these skills that we're discussing here that are taught in the PEERS program?
No, that's a great question. We have developed these interventions at UCLA. We do have a clinic at UCLA, the UCLA PEERS clinic. But one of the things that I'm really passionate about is disseminating or sharing these programs with other people. I don't want people to have to come to UCLA to access this program. And so we've written a number of books on PEERS. I have a book called The Science of Making Friends for parents, for teens, for adults who are sort of struggling socially. And then additionally, we have a number of treatment manuals that professionals, both educators and mental health professionals, use to implement this program. And at present, PEERS is actually used in over 35 countries, and it's been translated into over a dozen languages. And so if you visit our website, the website is www.semel, that's SEMEL, .ucla.edu/peers, you can find a list of our PEERS certified providers really across the globe. But at the very least, people can access these books and manuals on Amazon or wherever books are sold. We don't want to hoard this program. Just here at UCLA, we really have been dedicated to really sharing it with as many people as we can.
So if parents, educators, mental health professionals want to get more information, is that the best way for them to go about it, is to go to your website, or is there also an alternative method if let's say, they want to actually call and speak to a real-life person, or even contact you, if that's possible? How would they do that?
Yeah, you can definitely start to get more information on our website. We also have social media on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under UCLA PEERS. But if they want to contact our clinic directly, it's pretty simple. The email address is peersclinic@ucla.edu, and our phone number is 310-26-PEERS. So that's 310-267-3377.
Okay. Well, Liz, thank you so much for your time and all of the wonderful information that you have shared today. And is there anything else that you would like to add at this time that I haven't asked, or that you think it's important for our listeners to know?
Well, first, I just want to thank you so much, Gilda, for inviting me to share some of these strategies with your listeners, and just to also remind anyone that's listening that, sadly, teasing and bullying are very, very common. Even popular kids get teased or bullied. But as I mentioned earlier, it's how you react to it that determines how significantly and how severely you're teased and bullied. And the strategies that we've outlined in this podcast, I think, are really helpful for teaching kids how to combat these different types of bullying. But sadly, they are common, but we can equip our kids so that they can be less common.
I agree with you 100%, and thank you again, Liz, so much. I also want to thank our listeners for spending a part of their day with us. I'm Gilda Evans, reminding you to take care of yourself and that special person in your life.